Investments in securities market are subject to market risks. Read all the related documents carefully before investing.
Life is not always black and white. There are shades of grey. So are markets and especially valuation. So, how do we value banks? What metrics can we use to value banks? And what is the lesson that we can learn from the greatest investor of all time, Warren Buffett? Answers to all of these in our True Blue webinar. Join us this Saturday on October 14th, 11 a.m.
Making advisory succeed. Both an advisor and an investor must work together if you have to make an advisory relationship succeed. But what I have seen in my experience is that the entire onus of making the advisory relationship succeed is conveniently transferred onto the advisor's shoulders. Let me tell you where this thinking is not correct. Assume that an advisor tells a client to buy a particular investment, let's say a mutual fund scheme. The client layers his judgment on the advisor and takes inputs from social media, then decides not to go ahead with the investment. An advisor would usually give 8 or 10 advices in a year. Assume the client takes only 50% of this advice. In the end, the client may not participate in the winning advice of the advisor adequately. At the end of the year, the client wants to evaluate the quality of the advice. What I have seen is the client invariably goes to see the overall portfolio returns. That's all he sees. He does not see whether he effectively executed on the advice. He does not see how his layering of judgment affected the execution of the advice. And he does not see the impact of his non participation in winning advice. Yet, he simply goes to see one headline number and says the advice has not worked. Advice is not a point to point journey. Advice is a milestone journey. There are multiple points of time in which an advisor seeks to advise the investor. There are multiple times the investor approaches the advisor and seeks his advice. But not all these interactions are adequately acted upon. Many times, investors fail to act in a timely way on the best advice they have received. What is the consequence? The consequence is the investor's investment process becomes subpar in its execution efficiency. The process becomes weaker. The process weakness starts to affect performance, and that makes the very relationship between the advisor and the investor vulnerable. It becomes very tenuous. I have just told you a simple copybook example of an ordinary advisory relationship. Every advisor will have at least 20% of relationships which are like this. From an investor's point of view, what does this mean? From an advisor's point of view, what does this mean? I am going to talk about that because it's very important what it means to each side. First, to the advisor. I am of total conviction that an advisor should stop working with investors who are always doubtful and not adequately trusting, because in the end he will externalize his behavioral actions or non-actions or inactions on you, because he is just going to see the headline number on returns. However much the regulator says that advice stops at the point of delivery and execution is with the investor will always conveniently externalize the process and the execution and the outcome on the advisor. It is impossible on the part of regulators to educate investors on their own fiduciary responsibility. So, this gap is never going to be filled. The advisor has no option but to walk away from such relationships. Let's look at it from the investor's point of view, because all regulation is primarily meant for the investor. An investor who does not want to take the views of other people should not seek out an advisor. An investor must not seek out an advisor whom he does not trust adequately enough. An investor must be confident about the competence of his advisor before he begins the advisory relationship. After an investor begins an advisory relationship, he should not doubt the competence of the advisor. It's not in his own interest to do that. Trust is the hallmark, but competence is what keeps the wheels moving. That's how an advisory relationship can succeed. If we cannot establish such a relationship, either party is better off not engaging in such a relationship. Thank you for watching this video.